Morning, guys. One of the analogies that I love to use is the analogy of water when it comes to our thoughts, and the ocean being this never-ending abundance of water. If we can imagine that our thoughts are like water droplets, if we can work on every single day transforming those water droplets into positive thoughts, water droplets, and then adding them and continuing to build that up every single day, we can, in effect, make our minds like an ever-flowing ocean of abundance, of positive thought energy. And if we continue to do that, we continue to work at it every day, it might seem like it's such a huge, impossible task. But little by little, if we make our minds like an overabundant flow of an ocean, we'll see the physical manifestations in our life. Have a great day, everyone. One of the analogies that I love to use is the analogy.
I have been making espresso videos for 7 years now, and I thought it would be fun to look back on the first 7 espressos that I've made over the next 7 days, so you can enjoy, maybe have a few laughs, and hopefully also get inspired. Here we go. So today, let's look at the second espresso I ever made on Grant Cardone. Good morning, Believe Nation. If you are struggling with how to be memorable, how to make sure that you are on top of everybody's mind and they never forget your name, I'm going to share a great clip with you from Grant Cardone that I think will help.
When I go into an interview to get a job, I don't come out without a close. They'll either hire me on the spot, or they'll regret not hiring me. You might not hire me, but I promise you, you will regret not hiring me, and or you'll say, dude, who was that cat? Who was that guy that just came in here?
So while this clip is about getting an interview and getting a job, and that may not be your interest as an entrepreneur, the important message here is you need to be memorable, because you may not be interviewing for a job, but you are interviewing with clients, right? When clients are talking to you, when media is talking to you, when potential employees are talking to you, big suppliers are talking to you, you are selling yourself, and you need to be memorable. And being memorable means being yourself, having a strong opinion, standing for something, being passionate, being excited, so that after somebody walks away from a meeting with you, they're gonna love you, they're gonna love that energy and creativity, everything you threw into it, or they're not gonna love you, right? You don't wanna be in that middle ground, that boring zone. You wanna leave that lasting mark. I'm reminded of the story of Ty Warner, who's the founder of the Beanie Babies franchise and became a multi-billionaire. And in his early days, he used to show up for meetings with potential retailers who could sell his products wearing a top hat and a fur coat and a cane and a briefcase. And people used to always wonder, what's in the case? Who is this strange guy walking in? Like it or hate it, he made a lasting impression and he was memorable. Now, I'm not suggesting you have to get all dressed up and you gotta make this persona, you gotta make everybody curious and maybe think you're a little bit crazy, but you do have to do something that makes you memorable and makes you stand out. So my question of the day for you today is, what makes you memorable? I'd love to hear it in the comments below. What do people remember you for? How are you different? Share it in the comments. I'd love to see it, and I think it could also help inspire the other entrepreneurs who are watching. If you like this video and you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and the newsletter. Thank you so much for watching. Continue to believe, and I'll see you again tomorrow morning for another shot of entrepreneurship to kickstart your day on the right foot. If you want another amazing Grant Cardone video, check it out right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
If I sit with $100 in my pocket, folks, there is no economy. If you want to be economic, you let money flow. It has to move.
Morning, guys. As we go on this path to living, loving, and laughing our way to infinite mind wealth, I want us to remember one important thing. What we're trying to do here is what most people won't. 98% of people won't. And that's the challenge. We want to try to do it for ourselves and affect others and help them, inspire them to find their true great self. But it's a hard path, and I want us to remember and sort of laugh at the process, because what you're trying to do is like Gary Vaynerchuk says. He says, if you want to be an anomaly, in other words, be your true great self, you have to act like an anomaly. And that it's going to involve you standing out. It's going to involve you perhaps looking weird to other people. But remember, it's not in any sort of negative sense. It's just we're not used to it. All of us are not used to this path. So let's work together. Let's laugh, live, love our way there, and be empathetic towards each other, but never stop on it. It's the greatest path. Have a great day, everyone.
The physics training is a very good training where it's a good framework for reasoning, where you're trained to think about first principles and reason from there. And that means boiling things down to the most fundamental truths and then connecting those truths in a way to try to understand how reality is. Because physics has this problem where they're trying to figure out things that are totally counterintuitive. Yeah. And so they had to have a framework for getting there. Like quantum mechanics is incredibly counterintuitive, but it's true. And so so physics developed a framework for figuring out things that aren't obvious. And that's why I think it's a lot of advice, but it's the right framework.
Want to be happy? Build a life, not just a business. Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and this channel was created to help you overcome the #1 challenge that is holding you back, a lack of belief in yourself. You watch these videos because you know there's something more inside you too. You've got Michael Jordan level genius at something. So today, let's live your best belief life and learn the 7 rich people habits that you need to try. Enjoy. Habit number 2, have self-confidence with Bill Gates.
I think having some self-confidence is different than finding your passion. From a young age, ideally you'll have adults in your life, preferably your parents as part of that, some of your teachers, people around you who like you and they're behind you and they'll back you no matter what goes on. And that gives you enough confidence to go off on a quest. And during that quest, you try different things out. If you're lucky, when you're very young, you find something you're passionate about. I did when I was 13 years old. I found computers and software. It took me another 5 years to figure out that was my life's primary work. But that's a lucky thing. Other people, get out into their 20s or even later before they find what they're passionate about. But proceeding with a certain set of self-confidence, that there are people who care for you, you care for them, that you succeed in their eyes by your how you treat them. I think that's pretty basic, and it gives you the platform on which to try out new things, to fail. At first you're not going to succeed in various things. So self-confidence is primary, and then finding your passion is an adventure, a quest that may take time, and it may switch over the time of your life. But those deep relationships will let you pursue it with vigor.
Habit number 3, have discipline with Warren Buffett.
You don't need 150 IQ to do what I do, thank God. You don't need 140, you don't need 135. You may need 115 or something like that. But you do need discipline. You have to wait until you see the fat pitch to swing at. Because investing is a no-called strike game. If I were a baseball player and I only liked pitches 2 inches above my navel, some guy could learn that and he could pitch me, 3 or 4 inches below that, and I get called out on strikes because I never find a pitch I like. You can get called out on strikes in baseball. You have to swing at pitches that you don't even necessarily like, particularly after the count gets to 2 strikes. In business, you don't have to swing at anything. You can sit there and the paper says General Motors at 68, or it says General Electric at 115, or it says General Dynamics at 63. And if you don't like those prices, you don't have to swing. You can wait there day after day after day after day, and there are no called strikes. Now, when you swing, when you decide to buy something, then, if you swing and miss, it's a strike. But it's a marvelous game to be in because there are no called strikes, and you can simply wait for that one time in a month or 6 months or a year or 2 or 3 years when you really know what you're doing, where you like the price, where you like the people running the business, and then you swing, and you only need a few swings in your lifetime.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Habit number 4, be passion driven with Oprah Winfrey.
For me, I've already made more money than I expected. I've already got more shoes than I know. And I'm like, okay, what to do with the shoes? You know, so, and it never was about material possessions. I don't think if I could have, if I'd sat down and said, how do I dream myself up to be able to get all this? I wouldn't have known how to do it. So I was driven by a passion that was bigger than the show in the beginning. And I believe that in order to continue, every person has a responsibility to use their life. You, everybody who came here today, your life may not be as big as mine, meaning not as many people know you. And the only difference between being famous and not is that more people know your name. The real reality is what Billy was singing and what Maddie talks about in his poetry, is that we are really all alike, except for our hair. We are really all alike. And that has been one of the greatest lessons I've learned in doing this television show, is that what everybody is looking for is validation. In every experience, people are looking to know that they matter, that you matter, that I matter. In every encounter and all of your fights at home, all your arguments with your boss or with your children, with your husband, when you really peel back the layers and get down to what is this? What are we arguing about? You want to say, I matter. And I think that what we've been able to do on this show is to help people see that for themselves. And if I can be able to give that back to people in a way that makes them matter to themselves, then this is worth billions of dollars. Billions. It's priceless. It's priceless to be able to do that.
Habit number 5, be clear with Mark Zuckerberg.
The hardest thing for me early on was, because I just started off as, I was an engineer, or, I wasn't even really an engineer, as a student, right? I thought I was going to be an engineer when I graduated. And when you're building something yourself, you kind of have all the meetings in your head, right? It's like you don't need to articulate the principles so clearly. It's like you kind of can make all the trade-offs on everything from architecture to product to marketing to just all these things, and you're kind of just, you have the context to trade this off. And I think it's really easy when you start building something to underestimate how much context you need to put out there and how clear you need to be about what you're trying to do. So, most of my mistakes early on in building the company were about not being clear enough internally about what we were trying to do. I mean, there's this very famous episode where like in 2006, a couple years into building the company, Yahoo tried to buy us. And so they offered a ton of money, and a lot of the people who I'd hired at the point, they were kind of experienced technology executives, and this was like all of their startup dream come true, right? They joined, and then within a year or a few months, like the company had the opportunity to exit for this large amount of money. And I really failed through that period to communicate what we were trying to do and what we stood for. And in the absence of that context, then of course it was a rational thing for people to think that this was like a good outcome for us to have.
Habit number 6, expose yourself to new things with Mark Cuban.
The same thing I told myself, the same thing I tell everybody. One, you're 21, 22, 23 years old, right? You don't have to figure it out right now. Don't try, right? You spend all this money, paying to learn. Now is your chance to get paid to learn. You don't need the perfect job. You just need to go somewhere where you'll learn and start to be exposed to different ideas And now it's not like, you know, when Greg 40 years ago was graduating.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And
Wow.
me 5 years ago, you know, it was like, get a career. And, you know, the pressure was get a career, go work for IBM or General Motors and get a pension. Those days are gone. People can't even pay their pensions anymore. And so you're a free agent. And you're always going to be a free agent on the market. You guys are the Kevin Durant's and LeBron James, you know, where you're always out there and can go find a better situation for yourself. Do what's best for you. What have you got to lose? Like when I started my company, you know, after I got fired by Michael Umecki, you know, what was good? How bad could it be? I would lose my Motel 6 towel, you know? It was just like, what have you got to lose? And yeah, I understand there's pressure from student loans, and there's a lot of conversations we can have there, right? But, you know, you can get a job that doesn't have to be perfect. You can learn at that job, and you guys have the pedigree, you have the brains, you have the initiative to go out and try the next job, you know? The good news is the economy is good enough that it may not be perfect, but you can go job to job. Don't look for the perfect answer. Just look to get the experience, look to learn, because all these different exposures, all the different things you learn, learning how to learn, that's what's going to get you excited and juicy for something that you love. Because once you find something you love to do, that's when the magic happens. Because when you're able to find something you love to do, then you can start focusing on, how can I be great at this? And like Greg found out he was a great networker. I like to, you know, play with technology and try to do things first. You know, whatever it is that you find about yourself, then you can try to be great at it. And it's rare when people quit things they're great at. You know, and so trying those things, so that's how I advise people. Don't stress, just go out and try different things.
And habit number 7, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is reset your motivation with Stephen Bartlett.
Every year around February, March, I say the same thing to myself and I set myself the same goal. Let's just stop there, right? And take a look at what I just said, because there's a real clue in that first sentence. Why does this goal pop up in March? The answer, quite an obvious one, because summer is on the horizon. And you've got to ask yourself again, you've got to criticize yourself there and say, well, why does summer matter? Well, because, you know, summertime is a time where we wear less clothes, we're a little bit more vulnerable, our bodies are on show more. And then you've got to ask yourself, okay, so why is that relevant? Well, it speaks to the nature of my motivation. My motivation wasn't to work out. It wasn't to be healthy because I want long-term health benefits or to feel great about myself. As embarrassing as this is to admit, my motivation was so clearly to look good for summer. Let's just break that down a second. Look good for summer. Looking good as a goal is measured by just one thing, the public's opinion of me, ladies' opinion of me. That's what we call an extrinsic external goal. Success of that goal will be achieved when the public think I look good. The next part of that sentence, right, was for summer. The next part of my goal was for summer, which is a measurable time frame. So once summer is over, the job is done. So the motivation behind that goal was both extrinsic and held within a time frame. So when I dropped that social media pic of me topless in Mykonos or wherever I went this summer, Mykonos and Costa Rica, looking good during summer, and when I got the compliments, the likes, the followers, the praise, and when summer passed, unsurprisingly, so did my motivation. Job done. My goal, my reason, my why was attached to summer and also public opinion, and both had been fulfilled. So as I pulled into October and I tried to find the motivation to go to the gym, it was gone. Going to the gym suddenly felt so pointless to me, and I had no idea why. It just did. Even when I managed to get to the gym, my workout was quite honestly pathetic. It was short. It was like 25, 30 minutes of me predominantly texting, and I didn't know why. I just thought I wasn't feeling great. Like, you know, like a boat that had suddenly been unanchored, I was now just drifting unconsciously without intention or real motivation or without conscious realization into the winter months, into bad habits, into Fat Steve. And the minute I realized this year, I was able to completely reset and sort of re-anchor my motivation into things that were intrinsically internally motivating and without timeframes. I set myself the goal of going to the gym just because it makes me feel great and because of the energy it gives me and the positive impact it has on my sleep. And because, you know what, I love showing myself how self-disciplined I am. I get a real weird feeling of joy by going to the gym on a day when I feel like shit, because for me, that's kind of overcoming my mind, right? It's like beating the negative or the weaker parts of my mind that are trying to dissuade me from doing something that's in line with my long-term values.
The law of compensation is exact. The law of compensation clearly states the amount of money you earn will be in exact ratio to these 3 points. Number one, the need for what you do. The need for what you do. Number two, your ability to do it. And number three, the difficulty there will be in replacing you. Now think of that. Number one, the need for what you do. Number two, your ability to do it. And number three, the difficulty there is in replacing you. Now, odds are pretty good. The need for what you do is already there. You don't have to do anything about that. Number three will be taken care of if you take care of number two. You may want to think about this for a little while. I thought about it for a long while, and I realized it's pretty true. So you see, you only have to focus on one of those 3 points, and that is number two, your ability to do it. Whatever you're doing, you want to get better at it. Just keep working at getting better at what you're doing. And there isn't any competition. You're the only competition you're ever going to have. Master whatever you do. Master it.
Like any entrepreneur, when you start a business, you start to worry, and people around you worry much more than you do. When I started Alibaba, my parents worry, my wife worry, my friends worry, my teachers worry, my students worry, everybody worry. And they worry about a lot of things. The only thing that I worry is that I should not disappoint the people who believe in me. And when we started the Alibaba, we have a lot of things people worry. Well, you know, when we started Alibaba, say, hey, you don't have a payment. You don't have a trust. People do not believe in online. They believe in face-to-face meeting. And the government does not support internet. Nobody supports e-commerce. How could you do it? I think as an entrepreneur, if everything is ready, that does not need you. Because nothing is ready, that needs entrepreneurship. For counterfeit things, of course, there are a lot at the beginning, but you have to fix it. So in the past 15 years, we spend a lot of time because you have to making sure the customer feels safe, happy, the brand feels happy.
The reputation is the best.
Reputation.
The reputation is the best.
Otherwise, the people say, I sell on the site and my things were copied and stolen. So we using a lot of ways to do that. Today, more than 100,000 brands partner with us.
So the story that I tell is of a man, and I heard this story from a guy named David Bednar, but who's an educator and a religious leader. But basically, the story is a man in his truck, and this was, I think, back in the 70s. He wanted to test out his new pickup truck, and I think he lived out in somewhere in the U.S., like in the Rocky Mountains where it snows a lot. And so he drove up the mountains, up in the snow, and he was just going to test his truck, and he was a little overconfident in this thing. Anyways, he ended up getting stuck in some really deep snow, and he was trying to peel out his tires and couldn't get himself out. And so he didn't know what to do. And this was back again before cell phones, so it's not like he could just call home. He was out there up in the mountains by himself. So ultimately what he ended up doing, was getting out, and he started chopping down a tree and cutting up firewood, and he stuck up while he was just waiting and just hoping that someone would drive by so he could flag them down. But ultimately no one came, and he ended up, chopping up a tree and putting it in the back of his truck, totally filling up the bed of his truck, and then no one came, and it was getting darker and darker, colder and colder. So he got in his car, turned on the car, said a prayer, and then tried to back out of the snow. And actually, because of the weight of the wood, he was able to get traction, which ultimately allowed him to get out. He wouldn't have been able to get traction in his tires, but because of the weight of all that wood, he was able to get out. And so the idea is that you need a load of wood, or he needed a heavy load to actually get traction and move forward, or get out of the bad situation, or to move forward. And the principle is the same for what I felt in my own life. For years, I'd wanted to be a writer, but I didn't really have any, I didn't have a load on me. I didn't, and this is what we're talking about as far as responsibility, like a load of responsibility. Like I had a lot of time, and when you have a lot of time, when you have a lot of freedom and flexibility, it's really easy to waste that time. And so once we got these 3 foster kids, it was seriously, from my perspective, equivalent to the load of wood in the back of that truck. Like it was in my life, like these 3 kids were a heavy load for me and my wife. Like it was intense, but interestingly, and kind of, as you said, counterintuitively, it really gave me traction. It gave me motivation. It gave me inspiration. It created urgency. And so I, very shortly after we got these kids, I started waking up early and started writing and started moving on with my goals and getting more committed. And it's amazing how you can get committed in life. And it's amazing once you truly commit to a future and commit to what you want. And when you just start waking up early and start rocking towards your goals, things can change, and seriously, within like 3 or 4 months of writing online, like my blogs were blowing up, being read by millions of people. And I just had a level of urgency and excitement towards my future. And I give a lot of credit to that load of responsibility that I had, which was my kids, which, you wouldn't have expected. You'd expect that actually you'd be more overwhelmed, or you would procrastinate your dreams even more. But for me, it was just the traction I needed to like really get focused and committed.
I was in Johannesburg a little while ago, and I went through the airport. And I went into the men's room or washroom or bathroom, however you want to call it. And so I walked in to the men's room, and the first thing I hear is, "Welcome to my office." And this was the janitor at the Johannesburg men's room.
That's funny.
Who janitorized, or I'll make up a word, cleaned the toilets like Mozart composed music. Mm-hmm. Now that man has no money. That man probably has very little education. That man is judged by the world as having an unimportant job.
Right.
And that man is a hero, could be a hero to millions of people. Why? Because he actually saw himself as an ambassador to South Africa. And his passion was palpable. And his visceral commitment to doing work at the highest level was like you don't see even from the CEOs. Right. And all I'm saying is, even the person with the broken heart, the person who's down on their knees, whether they see it or not, they have a choice to rise above their circumstances. And leadership and humanity is a testament to the people who have done it. I mean, you you look at Mandela, 27 years in imprisonment. When his son died, he wasn't allowed to attend the funeral of his own son. He said that was one of the great pains of his life. And what did he do? The victim looks at something like that, torture, and says, "I am broken." And they give up, and they close their heart, they close their mind, they close their creativity, and they blame the rest of their life on what happened to them. Mm-hmm. But Mandela, what he chose to do was to use it as an opportunity, because actually, the things that break your heart, if you choose, can open your heart. Mm-hmm. Fear, the world says fear is bad. Fear is only an opportunity for bravery training. And what he did was he used those 27 years of torture to open himself mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, to the point where when he was released and became the president of South Africa, he invited his jailers to sit in the front row at his inauguration. And he was asked why, and he said, "Because if I don't, I'd still be in prison." Right. And that's a long way of saying, but we do make excuses because we are very good at self-deception. Because if we actually had to face the responsibility of playing with our bigness in the world, we'd have to let go of our addiction to our excuses and leave what's safe. Am I making sense?
No, totally.
Here?
No, you're totally making sense.
You'd have to leave what's safe. I mean, we are addicted to crisis sometimes. It makes no sense. We are addicted to pain. Mm-hmm. And we'd have to actually leave the pain to go out to the possibility of pleasure and joy and greatness. And believe it or not, that frightens us. Right. So we make these excuses, and then we blame people. "Oh, Joe or Robin, I don't like the way he looks. He speaks differently." But subconsciously, as you're suggesting, those are just our protective mechanisms to avoid owning the responsibility of our brilliance.
Also knew that, of course, I'd have to work really, really hard if I was ever going to make it. Of course, I'd have to get back up every time I got knocked down on the journey. But I knew if I was going to make it, like the most important thing came down to me believing that I could. And for me, you know, and here's the thing, a lot of times we hold ourselves back because we say things to ourselves like, oh, I'm not qualified, or, oh, I feel this like dream on my heart to whatever it is, launch a podcast, whatever it is. But it's like, oh, but I'm, you know, don't know how, and I don't know, I have no connections, and all the things we tell ourselves. And for me, in a way, it almost made no sense that I created a beauty company, right? And just the idea of it, because I didn't know anything about it. I knew no one in the industry. But every time I get still, like for me, and you know, no matter what people believe, whether it's they're hearing the universe talk to them or God talk to them, like for me, I hear it through my own intuition and my own gut instinct.
The idea here is, look, commit.
Guys, today Gary Vaynerchuk shares his first rule for success, and that is bet on your strengths. This is another one that we often forget on a daily basis. We have to remind ourselves of what we're good at, or the things that we really love to do. What are your strengths? We all have strengths. We've just allowed the things that we're not good at to overtake us, and we forget on the fact that we all have something we're really good at. So Gary Vaynerchuk reminds us to bet on our strengths and to just focus on that and forget about what you're not good at. Learn from everything. You're going to get better, but you got to cultivate that thing that you love doing, that thing that brings you that joy, and that thing that you're really good at. So bet on your strengths, and then he says go all in on that. Really share that with the world. Be that and just live that. So hopefully we can remember that. Have a great day, everyone.
You really are your only comparison group, especially as you get older, because your life is so idiosyncratic and peculiar that I mean, look, you have to care what other people think. It's stupid to think otherwise because you have to be social and you have to be aware of what other people are doing and all of that. So this isn't psychopathic individuality, but it is genuinely true that no one has your set of opportunities and limitations. And so the comparison just isn't real. It can't be sufficiently multidimensional. You know, because maybe you see someone who's rich. I've met many people who are very, very rich. And you can look at their lives and they have these huge houses and material plenty, and they're shielded from many catastrophes that would hit someone without those resources harder. But their lives are still full of exactly the same troubles that characterize human life in general. And so you compare yourself on one dimension. You don't see, well, the person's worked 80 hours a week for 40 years and it's blown all his relationships out of the water. It's like, yes, he's rich, but he's also old now. You know, he's 60. And one of the best predictors of wealth is age. You know, really, do you want to be young and poor or old and rich? It's like, I'd pick young and poor because you can't buy youth. And so, and that's something that's worth considering. But you don't know what burdens the people you're jealous of are carrying. So leave it be. It's not helpful to you to be envious.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more. And you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Jordan Peterson, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy. Rule number 2, know what you want.
If you know what you want, then you know when you're failing. If you don't allow yourself to know what you want, you can keep that foggy. If you don't set out the conditions for your success, then you can avoid your responsibility because, again, that's not clear. And the problem with wanting something is that in all probability, you're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to make sacrifices. And it's certainly possible that you want to avoid that. you might be afraid to make it clear because other people could deny it to you too, which is something I write about a fair bit in that chapter. The problem is, and failing to make any of that clear protects you right now, but it's really hard on you over the medium to long term, because if you don't make it clear to yourself what you want or to other people, the probability that you're just going to stumble into it is pretty low. And you can put that off indefinitely day after day, but the problem with that is that you age while you're doing that, and there's obviously a price to be paid for that. So that chapter, that's chapter 3, do not hide things in the fog. I mean, it's a warning about failing to pay attention. You know, knowledge emerges in a very strange way. It emerges, obviously, when we learn something, we started out by not knowing it. And so what that means is that knowledge goes through a transformation process from being absolutely not there to being explicit and fully detailed. And one step of that process is emotion. And so, for example, you might find yourself frustrated and disappointed about the events of the day, but be unable to exactly specify why. That's extremely common. You know, you go home to your partner and you be in a bad mood, and, you know, you'll snap at them for something and they'll say, well, what's up with you? And you'll say, well, nothing, you're just being annoying, when it's perfectly clear to both of you that there is actually something up with you. And then that disappointment and frustration, anger and sadness, let's say, or anxiety, is a sign that something isn't right. But it isn't necessarily that you're repressing knowledge of what's not right. It's that you actually don't know. And the emotion is the first step in the process by which that knowledge emerges. And you might have to sit and think and talk to your partner or to a friend for God only knows how long before you're actually going to put your finger on what it is that you're upset about. And it could be very far removed from whatever happened to trigger you in the moment. And so that's the fog. And you can keep things in the fog just by not doing that. It's really easy. It's no more difficult than just sitting there doing nothing, because creating knowledge is active and difficult.
Rule number 3, follow established rules.
The best advice that you can really give to people who are young is that unless you have very good reason not to, you should do what all people have always done. And so what does that mean? When I see my clinical clients, although I'm not practicing anymore, when I saw my clinical clients, I would evaluate their lives across a number of dimensions. Were they immersed in a network of friendships? Did they have a family? And that could be their family of birth, but also the family that they've produced, their own husband or wife and children, if they were of an age where that was appropriate. Did they have a career or at least a job? And was their job productive and matched well with their abilities and their ambitions? Were they educated to the extent that their intelligence and curiosity might demand? Were they in reasonable physical and mental health, independent of those other areas? All of those things need to be established, and you don't want to question them so much that you don't establish them. You might think of yourself as a rebel and someone who's particularly unique, and it's also possible that you are unique in one or more ways, but fundamentally speaking, if you don't do what everyone else does, then the probability that you're abdicating your responsibility and that you will miss out on something important is extremely high. So, you know, our culture, virtually every movie that's made for children now, you see this coming out of the Disney studios constantly, always concentrates on the special child who's got abilities that no other child has and is being crushed by society into being, you know, unpleasantly normal. And there is a fair bit of crushing that goes along with being socialized, because part of being socialized is to become like everyone else. But you don't want to underestimate the benefit of that. It's very, very difficult to tread your own path, and you're only going to be able to do that in a limited number of areas. You blow apart the social routines, you'll find yourself out there in a domain of chaos that will overwhelm you, and that's not pleasant. You do not want that.
Rule number 4, set a harder goal.
With regards to your goals, let's say you don't know what to do. Well, maybe you're high in openness, and so you're pulled in all sorts of directions, or maybe you're low in conscientiousness, or you're confused because you're anxious, or you haven't had any direction, you haven't had good mentoring, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of reasons. Well, I would say pick something, right? Pick something, a nameable goal, and then try to implement it. And what'll happen is you'll learn a lot by trying to implement it. And one of the things you might learn is what a slightly better goal might be. You know, because if you try something diligently and you succeed or you fail, you're going to learn from the effort expended in the detailed implementation of the goal is going to inform you. It'll also transform you physiologically. It does that at a very basic level, neurophysiological level. You will be slightly different as a consequence of the attempt. And what that'll mean is that the next goal you pick will be a little more suited to you. And so it's this kind of pathway, right? It's like maybe the goal you should be attaining is here, but you don't know that because you're clueless. And so you aim there. Well, it's better than there. And it's not nothing. It's not cessation of movement. And, you know, if you're supposed to go there and you go here, but you walk diligently towards it, you're a little closer once you get to here than you were here. And it's this oscillating self-corrective process that leads you to the final star. And you have to be willing to engage in erroneous experimentation to manage that, but it is a self-correcting process. And so one of the things I always talk to my clients about is, well, let's try something, you know, and we'll reserve to ourselves the right to alter our trajectory. And then I would use as a corrective there, because you might say, well, how do you know when you're not just giving up, right? Instead of thinking maybe you need a different goal. And I would say, well, you can, if you're really concerned about your proclivity for self-deception, you can enter into a contract with yourself that you won't replace any goal you've set with a goal that's easier. And so you can switch your goal, but it has to be a little harder so that you check yourself against that tendency to withdraw and avoid and be self-deceptive. And that works like a charm. And if you do that with some degree of diligence, your goals will get better and more attainable, and you'll get happier too, because you don't experience happiness except in relationship to a goal. And that's really worth knowing. You know, and that's another thing to think about too. If your life is meaningless, well, you're not pursuing a valued goal. I mean, you might be depressed too, and sometimes that can be like an illness, you know, something that is really wrong with you. But a good rule of thumb is that if you find no joy in life, there's a very low probability that you're pursuing a goal that you regard intrinsically, like in the depths of your temperament, as worthwhile. And that's technically true, because we do in fact experience most of the positive emotion, let's say, that's associated with emotions like joy. We experience that in relationship to a goal. So, well, then you want to find a goal that regulates your negative emotion and that brings you a certain amount of positive emotion and that expands your competence as you pursue it. And you will experience that as meaningful. That's really what meaning signals. Meaning signals you're doing all those things. You say, well, that's not real. It's like, don't listen to the semantic chatterbox so much, right? There's levels of you that are far wiser than that. And you can watch what happens to you instead of noticing what you think.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, shift your thinking.
If the goal of life is to live a life which in retrospect we are glad that we lived, it's important to give ourselves perspective, to develop that metacognizance, to step away from the urgent, to step away from the phenomenological day-to-day existence, because the present self is a petulant child. It's lazy and it wants the path of least resistance and that glass of wine and that new movie on Netflix and the couch looks really comfortable. Very rarely does it do...
Yeah, well, that's the danger with impulsive happiness, is that it does have that present bound quality.
And in retrospect, that can lead to a life that's not well lived.
Generally, yes. Life definitely places philosophical demands on you, whether you want it to or not. And so it is useful to step back. I mean, that's likely why the trait openness evolved. That's the creativity dimension. That's the dimension that allows people to engage in philosophical discourse and to think laterally. And it does allow you to step back and look at things on a broader scale and to generate creative alternatives. The problem with examining your assumptions is it's very disquieting, because you want things to act the way you predict and desire them to act. And you work within a set of axioms and you act them out in order to maintain that predictability, that desirable predictability. If you mess around, the more fundamental the axiom that you question, the more uncertainty you release. And some of that can be positive, but plenty of it can be anxiety provoking. I mean, just imagine that you're in a relationship and it's maybe a year into it and you haven't formalized and finalized it, but then one day you allow yourself to ask the question, is this the relationship I want to be in? Well, that's a fundamental question, but just imagine now you're destabilizing your entire future. You're destabilizing your present. You're destabilizing your past, because while engaging in the relationship, you're acting out the assumption that it's the proper relationship. But now you question that. That means the story you told yourself about what was happening while it happened, even though it's already happened, was wrong and something else had happened. And then you have to think through what actually happened. So it's unbelievably demanding. And the more axiomatic the assumption, the more certainty is cast into troublesome chaos. Now, you could say, yeah, but the alternative is worse. And I believe that often that's true. But the thing about the alternative is that you can always forestall it, right?
Mañana.
Ask that question tomorrow. You bet. And it's a very powerful temptation, and no wonder. Do you want to dig up the body now, or do you want to wait a month? It's like, well, it'll be more rotten in a month, but it's not a month. It's not now, right? It's not now. And so I understand why people don't want to delve into things, even if their emotions indicate that they should. I mean, I would see this all the time. If you're trying to settle an important issue with your partner, let's say, that can be a tremendously troublesome excavation process. And there's no shortage of pain. But if you sort it out, then maybe things can be better. Doesn't mean it's easy or pleasant. Quite the contrary. It's like surgery. It's like surgery to remove something, that shouldn't be there. It's necessary, but man, it's still surgery.
Rule number 6, build self-awareness.
On that point of understanding my inadequacies or someone's inadequacies, I really believe that it's really difficult to undergo self-development if you don't have self-awareness. And I was really trying to understand from your writings how someone is to build their self-awareness. It's almost like the unknown unknown. If you don't have it, how do you build the thing?
Oh, I know a good exercise for that. It's like a prayer in some sense. In fact, I would say it's proper prayer. If you want to know something about yourself, sit on your bed one night and say to yourself, you got to mean this. Like, you got to be desperate. This is no game, this. It's like, my life is not everything I want it to be, and perhaps it's not everything that I need it to be. And by need, I mean my life is so unbearable that the suffering that's attendant upon that is make me nihilistic, cynical, bitter, resentful, homicidal, genocidal, unable to have a good relationship, prone to punish people for their virtues because of my jealousy, driving the proclivity to see evil everywhere except within my own heart. Like, these are problems, man. And you ask yourself, you sit on the bed and say, okay, man, I'm ready to learn something. Like, what's one thing I'm doing wrong that I know I'm doing wrong
that I could fix, that I would fix. It's like, you meditate on that, you'll get an answer. And it won't be one you want, but it'll be the necessary one. You know, and it's often something that will point you to small things. So Carl Jung said, people in the modern world don't see God because they don't look low enough. And so imagine you're in your messy bedroom, you know, and you're sitting on the edge of the bed trying to have an honest dialogue with yourself. And the little voice says, you know, it's pretty disgusting in here. And you think, well, I'm way above such trivial niceties as organizing my room. It's like, well, that's pride. That's arrogance. If you're above organizing what's actually yours, how in the world are you ever going to organize anything else? And so you get on your knees and you think, well, it's time to, you know, take a brush to the toilet. And maybe that's where you start. And so, and that works, like that works. You start making those micro improvements, like real micro improvements, real on the ground, actual micro improvements to things you know that are wrong, you'll improve unbelievably rapidly.
Rule number 7, engage with society.
Thoughts on the drug epidemic? Well, I'm not sure there is an epidemic any more than there always has been. I know that there is now a tilt towards drugs in the US in particular, like meth and fentanyl and the other opiates, and that's quite a catastrophe. A lot of that is occurring among people who don't have meaning in their lives, I would say. And you might think that's a facile answer, but it's not. You know, like here's the rat literature. Like it's, if you take a rat, lab rat, typical lab rat is, you know, genetically bred to be identical with many other lab rats, and he lives alone in a cage, and he's got a pretty miserable rat life because rats are social animals and they don't like to live in cages by themselves. And you can get a lab rat in a cage addicted to cocaine in no time flat, and he'll like press a lever for cocaine reward, to pretty much to the exclusion of all else, including sex and often including food. But if you take that same rat and you put him in a rat family, you know, in a rat social hierarchy, in a rat environment, and give him something that rat like to do so that he can be satisfied, it's very difficult to get him addicted to cocaine. And so I would say the reason that people take psychomotor stimulants, and all the drugs of serious abuse are psychomotor stimulants, regardless of what else they might be, they activate the dopaminergic system, which is the system that tracks reward and that is associated, that's activated when you pursue valuable goal-directed behavior. If you don't have that, if you don't have a valid goal, if you don't have no real valid meaning in your life, if you don't have a valid ambition, then you don't have any way of activating that system. And why the hell wouldn't you take drugs? It's like you have to have something better to do to not addict yourself, you know? So I would say that a huge part of the current epidemic in the US in particular is manifest among broken men who have no real place in society, and providing them with money isn't going to help that. They need a productive and meaningful existence, and which is the paramount goal, should be the paramount goal of social policy, for example. It isn't the alleviation of poverty that's really the issue, because people in the West aren't poor. There might be a bit of a distribution problem, but we're not poor. What we have is what would you say, we have a problem of meaningful engagement, and that's what has to be addressed, and that's why I do the work that I'm doing.
Rule number 8, create a committed relationship.
How much do people have to kind of date around to find somebody, though? Because it does take a bit of exploration to find somebody you're compatible with. So what's a reasonable amount of exploration, and like by what age should people have figured it out? Because I mean, there's always the grass looks greener. So at some point, maybe you should just settle down. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, life isn't very long, and so you don't get to evaluate that many relationships. You probably only have a 5 to 10 year period to do that, something like that. And then the reason you only have that amount of time is because it gets more and more difficult as you get older rather than easier, partly because people your age are increasingly in relationships. So I would say get at it. Don't overestimate the degree to which you have to find someone versus create the relationship. You know, there's many cultures, and I'm not suggesting that this is necessarily a desirable alternative. But there are many cultures that arrange marriages, and those arranged marriages frequently work. It's not obvious that they work less frequently than relationships or marriages that are predicated on romantic attraction, which has its own pitfalls. No matter who you find, they're going to be full of flaws like you are, and so a lot of it is something you create. I think you want to find someone you can trust and someone that you're attracted to, and perhaps someone who shares the same ambitions as you do, or at least has ambitions that are compatible with yours. And then, well, then pretty much all of it after that is what you create rather than what you find.
Is part of the reason that arranged relationships or arranged marriages work, is part of it because there's a societal pressure to not get divorced, and because it's somebody your parents have chosen, there might be an expectation that you're supposed to uphold?
Of course. I mean, that's partly why marriages in the West work too, or marriages in cultures where the primary impetus for the marriage is romantic or sexual attraction. Part of the reason those marriages work is because of social pressure. It's very difficult to sustain a relationship across time, and you need all sorts of social institutions as well as conceptual schemes operating to help ensure that that's the case. Because life is so difficult, you're going to go through periods of time where your relationship is extraordinarily difficult, but there's no escaping that. And if the pressure to stay together wasn't there, the relationship might fragment prematurely. And then not only would you have your problems, you'd also not have any relationships. And that's not helpful. So you go through thick and thin together, and it can be very thin. The thin times can be very thin. But the collective judgment of the human race so far has been that long-term monogamous relationships are the best that you can manage. And that's true cross-culturally. There are exceptions. Polygamy is relatively common, nowhere near as common as monogamy, but there are exceptions made for polygamy. But the problem with polygamous societies is that they tend to be more violent, especially the young men in them tend to be more violent because they are more shut out of the mating game, and that makes them very frustrated.
Oh, that makes sense. So it'd be mostly, yeah, that makes sense. That'd make me pissed off too. Why does this guy over here have 7 wives? He'd be better off dead.
Yes, and I might be the one to help him along with that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of what monogamy does, is stabilize societies, and that means that in stable societies, fewer people die. And so, all things considered, our species has decided that that's a good trade-off.
Rule number 9, be disciplined.
How is it that discipline and the straight and narrow offer the best chance for a good life? And how is it that we have forgotten that is the case?
Well, the reason that discipline is necessary is because you're a mass of competing short-term interests. And so the question is then, well, which short-term interest should win out? And the answer to that is, well, none of them. They need to be organized into a hierarchy that makes them functional across time and across individuals. So like a 2-year-old is very likely to act out his or her proximal impulse. But of course, a 2-year-old can't survive in the world. You have to bring your primary instincts, let's say, under the regulatory structure of a higher order value system that allows them to manifest themselves without undue mutual sacrifice across large spans of time in the presence of large numbers of other people. So that requires a very sophisticated ordering. It's like, we already talked about the fact that a meta-narrative is necessary to unite subcultures, say, so that they can operate peacefully and harmoniously within the same space. The same thing applies within you, because you're an internal coalition of warring single-minded tribes, and they have to all be brought under the organizational structure of long-term collective vision, let's say. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, you have to be disciplined. And any discipline, technically speaking, is an attempt to bring all those competing short-term impulses under a larger scale and more inclusive framework. And so you do that, and then, well, that's actually what gives you freedom. Being impulsive and being free aren't the same things, because if you're impulsive, you're just the slave of your impulses.
Right.
There's no freedom in that. That's the same freedom, so to speak, literally, that a 2-year-old has, because a 2-year-old isn't socialized yet. So it's a completely, that doesn't function in the sophisticated world. It doesn't work.
Right.
Everyone knows it.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is have someone who believes in you.
My father gave me an abiding, and then the other thing I should say about him is he spent a tremendous amount of time with me when I was very young, say before I was 5 or 6. He taught me to read. He did that every night for months, and I remember that very vividly, and instilled in me a love of books and a fluency in reading. He believed that I could do what I set my mind to. And he really believed that. And to have someone that believe that of you, that's something, man. And, it was something that I wanted to offer to my clinical clients, because I did believe that there was more to them than the suffering person that was sitting there, and that, with joint diligent effort, we could sift our way through the chaff and find the wheat, and that things could be better. And one of the lovely things about practicing as a clinician was that almost inevitably happened, and sometimes really radically. And then, of course, later it started to happen on a broader scale, and I was seeing that happen in the lives of maybe thousands of people.